no airline's changed the business model yet. And the reason is they're too scared and they're following the leader. And I'll say it now on the podcast. There is not one single airline that is customer centric. You won't even recognize who they are. They've got a 6-digit PNR and a surname. So Smith and a 6 digits. Nowadays, customers' interaction with the airline is probably higher with the digital aspects. NDC's original goal was, how could you create an airline on an Amazon marketplace? The Airbnb, the Tesla, the Uber. It's going to be something like that. It'll be that'll come along.
It'll commoditize everything
and take a truly customer-centric approach and different.
Welcome everyone to the Flying High Club podcast. It's lovely to have you here, and I am joined with one of the industry's renowned experts, a innovator at heart, a ex-CTO of a major airline group, a doctorate from Chartered Institute of IT, and a black belt in Taekwondo. So someone definitely not to be messed with. It's Glenn Morgan, everyone. Thank you. Hi, Glenn. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, Raza. Nice to be here and enjoy the afternoon sitting down having a chat about travel.
I can't wait. I've been at this for a number of months now, trying to get some time with you because I think this perfectly suits you, and I would love to pick your brains on a ton of different topics. And I know everyone watching is going to be so intrigued with what you have to say. So let's dive in. So Glenn, where I want to start is your background. So a lot of this we want to cover is encourage people who are looking at the aviation space as well, the paths, and to understand where people are, who may have an interest in aviation, who want to understand where it can lead them. So it'd be really good to cover your past from when you were a young boy, when that enthusiasm for aviation came about, and then your career going forward. So let's begin there.
Yeah, well, obviously I'm from New Zealand. That's a good start. And travel's actually built into the DNA of most New Zealanders. It's a sort of rite of passage that when you reach a certain age, you travel, because New Zealand's fairly detached from a lot of other countries in the world. So, I ended up, coming out of my schooling, went into a university. I actually wanted to be an air traffic controller.
Really?
And did study in mathematics for being an air traffic controller, but had to be 21. So I had a bit of time to kill. So I thought I'd go sort of traveling, and I ended up traveling and backpacking my way over to Europe, as most Kiwis do, and traveling around Europe for an extensive piece of time. So the travel bug got me there.
So how old were you around this time?
So I probably left New Zealand around 19. I did a stint into Asia, where I was backpacking around sort of Vietnam and Bangkok and Thailand, and through the islands, and doing the sort of usual sort of touristy pieces that you do, and enjoying myself as a sort of an individual, traveling with a bunch of friends every now and again, catching up with different people, and doing lots of backpacking. So it was sort of the vagabond approach to life, and as I said, that's where my interest in travel sort of got. I experienced lots of different airlines, I experienced lots of different airports, I'd experienced lots of different travel, modal transport, from buses to trains to sort of hitchhiking, everything.
And in a unique destination. Asia is something like no one ever knows.
And it was a while ago too, Raza. So it was quite different back then. No instant mobile phone to find out where the local place to stay was. It was a lot more sort of, the old travel guides, and word of mouth was probably the way that you got around back in those days.
So how in terms of that experience, you're 19, full of energy, and I guess maybe it's built into every New Zealand, like you were saying. How do you gear yourself up? Like I'm from the UK, born and raised here. that would scare me. That I would love to do it, but there will also always be that mental barrier. How do you sort of get over that? That's
I think it was, as I said, it's part of the Kiwi DNA. It's the rite of passage to go travelling, and it is scary. But then you get quite easily, you experience it, and then you learn from it, and you start to enjoy it, and that was where it was. I had family that were over in the UK, so it was a natural sort of destination to head to. And stay with some of my family while I was over here, and by that time my funds were starting to get low, so it was decided I need to find some work to fund the next phase of the travel, which was essentially back in those days you could get a visa for a few years in the UK, and that allowed you to work and travel at the same time. So I did a lot of consulting and contracting.
Yeah.
The fortunate thing about New Zealand was before I left, I'd been doing some work in technology, and I'd been installing things called networks, which were foreign. Most back in that day, we're talking sort of back in the early late 80s and early 90s. Though networking wasn't that big of a thing in most corporates. They had a few PCs and they weren't talking to each other. They didn't have big-end systems at the back end. And I started installing these computer systems and networks. And we did this in New Zealand. And then when I got over here, what I realised is that a lot of the big companies from the US were testing product in New Zealand because it's an ideal demographic before shipping them worldwide to other parts. So at the time, for the people out there, Novell Networks was one of the big sort of networking companies in the PC world, and I was proficient in installing it. In fact, I had a very interesting interview, one of the first interviews for a contract, and they said we're looking for someone that can install Novell Networks, and they said, and I said yes, I can install this version here, and they said, well, that's not out. How can you have installed that? And I'm like, well, I've done three or four major installations, and they're going, but it's not possible, it's not out yet. And I'm going, yes it is. And they're going, no it's not. And I was like, oh, I better check this. And I got back and I realised that it had been released in New Zealand for about 6 months, and it was only just coming out. And the contract that I was fortunate enough to pick up was a major oil and gas platform company, and they were going to install it. So it was perfect timing.
Perfect, yeah. That's so you started your career in networking, going on towards consulting in the oil and gas. When did you start moving towards the travel and aviation space? How does that journey start coming
did
along?
a lot of contract work as I was sort of doing a bit of contract work, earning some money, go travel around Europe, and I come back. So you ended up doing lots of different roles. So I ended up working across banking, government, retail, industry, logistics, all sorts of different. I was very fortunate. I got to work across all of these range of different big corporates, and that was a great learning period.
Yeah.
I probably didn't realize it back then, but I was going into new big corporates, and there was different processes and different approaches to sort of how they were doing things. Everything was based on telecommunications, my degree, and it was in electrical engineering and stuff like this. So it was all on the same basis. It was more on the what was happening in technology. Technology was dragging me in more and more. The internet was starting to come out, and more companies wanted to be a part of that and driving their back office and driving their front office. And so, that was where it sort of grew. And I sort of worked over here. I was working for the UK government in the health department, up in Houses of Parliament, doing the installation there. That led on to a work with the European Commission over in Europe. I went over to Luxembourg and started doing, it used to be called the RACE network, which was the first sort of major connection of all the EU countries to one another so that they could be connected and actually communicate there. So started on to doing that and did a year, and then of course the EU started to kick in. I'd done about 3 or 4 years. It was about just under 3.5 years, and done in the UK and then into Europe. and more it was turning into you needed to have, you needed to be an EU citizen. Of course, I was a New Zealander, didn't have the rights. So it was getting harder and harder to find roles where, they would, I required the right visas and everything. So I made a decision to go to the US. I had a role lined up in Silicon Valley, in San Francisco, just outside of San Francisco. I decided to travel my way there, and I ended up in a place called Dubai. Back in those days, no, I don't think anyone even knew where Dubai existed.
What year are we talking here?
We're talking, oh God, now you're going to show up my age here, Raza. This is not fair. We're going back to sort of 89, around 89, when I went over to Dubai. And as I said, back in 89, no one even knew where Dubai was, let alone, people would say, "Oh, where are you going to?" Dubai.
What's that?
Where's that? I ended up out in the desert with my friends out in the desert at a big black tie party, and I ended up speaking to this individual who we sort of got on. He said, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I said, "I do telecommunications, networking, etc., etc." And he said, "Oh, we need lots of those types of people. You should come work for us." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, it sounds interesting. What do you know?" And anyway, we had a bit of a conversation, and he said, "Come into my office tomorrow." And so I ended up going there, and that happened to be Gary Chapman, who was the number 2 at Emirates Airlines. And I sort of was still in travel mode, so I turned up in shorts and a t-shirt, and we had a conversation about doing a role, and he said, "Well, yeah, why don't you do a little bit of contracting first? And if you like the contracting, then we can offer you a role." So I ended up binning the US and staying and ended up spending 6.5, 7 years in the Middle East with Emirates Airline. And that's where I got my bug for the airlines.
That's when it bit. So this is really interesting. This is one thing I didn't even know, that you were one of the you were in the founding phase of Emirates, which is
Correct.
Quite arguably one of the biggest airlines in the world.
Wasn't
right
even
now.
10 years old when I got there.
Wow.
And, everything was on ALCS, which is the old airline protocol, EDIFACT and X25 and ALCS. One of the first things I did was with another colleague of mine, we wrote a protocol translation called MATIP. And that was basically ALCS over IP. And we were one of the first to put in basically airline protocol over an IP network at the time. That protocol was then it was put into an RFC, and that was open sourced, and Cisco picked it up and stuck it into the iOS of the router for that, and that's basically what carries everyone's airline traffic today over IP. A little protocol called MATIP. So there's a little bit of history for you going back. That original RFC, there was quite a few contributors to the RFC, like normal. But so we were the founding partners of doing the ALCS. And so what we did there was to put the first global IP network in Emirates, where we connected all the Emirates offices up onto a telecommunications network and allowed the officers to communicate. And then also, instead of having separate X25 lines carrying the reservations and departure control traffic, we put in just one IP network. That saved significant amount of money, because traditional X25 were dedicated links, and we could start to use some of the cheaper routes and links. So that's how I got my bug for airlines. Then I sort of travelled back to the UK and was offered a role with British Airways back in the 90s, and picked up a role in 98 with British Airways.
Nice. And then how did your sort of career progress from then? And what were you sort of planning? Where did you want to go? Was it always travel? Was it to remain in travel? Or was it just see how things go and where you end up?
I mean, look, Raza, and I think I'll be honest and say that, I didn't really know what my career wanted to do or where I was going with the career. I think I break my career down into 3 verticals. I'd break it down into the first vertical being very deep into technology. I was, I ended up being one of the first CCIEs for Cisco. Back in the day, I was very, very technical on telecommunications and doing networks. My second part of my career was really much more broad and going for breadth. So I was fortunate enough to work with a lot of different, different companies, different verticals of companies. As I said, sort of banking, logistics, airlines, airport, government. And so I got to see all these different verticals. So I would say that gave me great breadth and breadth. And then the final sort of transition was really into strategy and looking at sort of taking all of that together and actually working out what the new business models could be. And that sort of led up to the end of, stage where I am at the moment, which is taking the knowledge of the depth of technology, what technology can bring, with the breadth of strategy, and putting those things together can actually create transformational change. And that's where I've focused on both on transformational change and innovation.
So that brings us really, really nicely on to some of the next points. But one thing I want to cover, so that recall that you've just had and recalling your career and stuff. So if you could give your younger self the advice or some advice from what you know now, what would that be? What would that look like? What would you add?
I think what I just talked about in terms of having a T-shaped career, i.e. having some depth and having some breadth and creating a T. What I've come across in much further down the line, and now that I've been into much senior roles, is that you have typically two types of people. You have someone that's very deep but doesn't have much breadth.
Yeah.
Yet they're probably an expert in their field of whatever the topic may be. And then you come across a range, and this tends to be what we call the middle management layers, or the middle to senior management layers, which have got lots of breadth. So they've got lots of breadth. They've been around businesses a long time, and they understand the businesses and everything like that, but they've got no depth.
Yeah.
And so you end up with either an I-shaped person that's very deep in the technology and gets it and understands it, or someone that's got a lot of breadth and understands the business but doesn't understand what depth can do in technology-wise or anything like this. The best people that I've ever had working for me were what I would call T-shaped people that had depth, i.e. they had an expertise or a subject matter specialism,
Yeah.
and then they had breadth, they had understanding of the business.
So able to have a holistic view.
And have a holistic view. So that shaped into a T-shaped person. I think that I still find those are the rarest people to find.
Do you think they're getting rarer and rarer now? Because I see that
yes.
For millennials, everyone bounces around quite often. Everyone wants opportunity or look at different roles, and no one, very rarely, I see now, the depth that you're talking about. It's a lot of bouncing around and building breadth, but there's no real substance or depth.
And I think you've got to build on the back of something. And I was fortunate enough to build on the back of telecommunications and networking. And networking is very particular, and it's critical to everything we do nowadays. Everything is networked. And if you look at where the industry's going and what the technology is doing, it's more and more about being networked. So that was a great foundation for me to have that depth. And then what you look at is having the breadth. And as I said, I think you're right. You say, you asked in the previous question, what should I have told myself? I was concentrate on, I did that by mistake, not by sort of deliberate sort of choice. And I think I would have been a bit more conscious about building breadth and building depth and having a real depth that you can go in and have people recognize you for a certain, subject matter expertise.
Yeah.
And if you've got that opens the door. And then if you can show the breadth, then the management or the leadership that you're working with will understand that you get the whole business and that you're bringing something very deep and technology based to that. And that gives you a lot more sort of credibility. It gives you a lot more ability to actually understand the complexities of what you're trying to do. And it gives the opportunity to do some really good transformational change. And I think that's something that I would sort of advise any younger person to have a look at, which is think about what is your specialism, and then the breadth will come quite quickly if you're a natural leader, but concentrate on getting a depth, get something that you can fall back on to and show people. You walk into a room, you have gravitas because you've got that experience and that depth.
Covering from your experience and the background and everything that we just went through, in sort of short, what sort of importance has travel and the travel space, memories, or all that sort of stuff? What importance has travel played in your life?
I think I probably have a different thought on it compared to a lot of people in terms of travel. I see it as freedom. I think that we have one Earth. I come from New Zealand, which is pretty much directly opposite to where the UK is in terms of geography. So what travel gave me was an understanding of a whole range of different cultures. I spent 7 years in the Middle East. I've traveled around all the major sort of religions. I've either worked or traveled around those locations and spent time. And one of the things that travel brings is freedom. It brings freedom of everything from knowledge, learning. It brings money, capital, all of those sorts of things, transits, and it's an understanding of everybody's human individuals. I think we can learn from every single individual in the world, whether they're in the Maasai in Kenya or, in the Middle East, or, it was in terms of, into all of the different locations from Americas to the Europe. And everyone's got a different culture and everyone's got sort of different beliefs or religions. Travel is a natural melting pot that brings everything together.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably very special. And so I'm very passionate about making sure that travel is an enabler of freedom for the globe.
Brilliant. I love that. I think, equally, I match that enthusiasm. And one thing I've always said is, especially people who work in travel, like yourselves, like myself, is I don't think sometimes we realize how important we are to the world when we build travel or the capability to travel. Because we have people who will be visiting family they haven't seen in a while, be visiting a newborn baby, going to grieve someone that has passed, celebrating milestones, all that sort of stuff. We are a part of society and the world in a emotional connection. It's not transactional as it may be. People used to think you just get someone from person A to person B. No, you've got a responsibility for someone to go from destination A to destination B to achieve a goal, objective, or a milestone. I think if you zoom out and see when you're working in travel, that sort of gives you that sort of business or that sort of self-satisfaction that you've played a role in society, which is amazing, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's an understanding of cultures and people. And if you understand cultures and people, then you have more tolerance for cultures and people. And travel brings that. It's until you've experienced those different cultures, how can you understand? You can't be a commentator on a culture and saying, I don't like this, if you haven't experienced that. And travel brings the opportunity to experience those sorts of things. Now, you don't have to necessarily always believe or support those sorts of things, but understanding it, experiencing it, gives you a much better empathy. And I think the world needs a little bit more empathy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's one of the key takeaways is empathy. So if we're going to focus on anything, everyone, empathy. That's the one word if we're going to take something away. Okay, so moving on to one of the other sections of this podcast is, so you'll see the industry is growing, especially in the aviation sector. We're hearing a lot of new innovative companies and even airlines. Taking from your background, from where you started, and it's a really good point to focus on, especially if you started your career in the Middle East. Emirates, that was at its sort of birth, when technology may not have been so, well developed compared to now. I'm going to ask you a question. If you were a CTO of one of these new airlines that have massive financial backing, like a Neom or a Riyadh Air, and you're building a digital-first airline or an airline for the future, how would you go about that?
So I think first, you've got to stand back and actually work out what you want to achieve. And so you need a very clear vision. I've said before, and I said it on stage at a very large conference where there was a lot of people, and and I'll say it now on the podcast, there is not one single airline that is customer-centric globally today, right? And that, I'll repeat that, there is not one single airline that is, customer-centric from scratch across the airline. So you'll see a lot of airlines, and airlines have done amazing things, and some of the Middle East carriers led the way in transforming this and being hard product. Hard products transformed, from a sort of 90-degree seat to a flat bed, those sorts of transformations over the time. And so the hard product is always being what airlines have prided themselves on, customer centricity. However, nowadays, customers' interaction with the airline is probably higher with the digital aspects than the physical aspects. They probably spend more time at a digital level than they do at a physical level when you start to look at it across it on an average. And that's because it's really complex. It's really, really hard. It's not easy. It's hard to understand unless you're in the industry.
Yeah.
And it's very, very frustrating when, things are not there. So I would start from customer centricity. I'd actually go as far as to say extreme customer centricity. And that's not just on hard product. As I said, I'll park the hard product because airlines are good at that now. That's a sort of job where they can always improve, but most airlines' hard products is
so
pretty
the playbook
good.
For that is sort of written.
It is written.
Yeah.
The digital playbook for customer centricity is not written. And there's a lot of interested parties that do not want to rewrite the book because there's a lot of value in the digital channels and in the digital sort of journey. And I think if you're a new airline or in a leadership position, then having the ability to be truly customer centric would be transformational. And that would add significant opportunities to drive revenue, significant opportunities to reduce cost, and therefore be a significantly more profitable and sort of going concern as an airline. I don't think any airlines really drastically taken that approach yet.
Yeah.
And that's because it's hard. It's not something you could just turn around and do. It's very, very difficult. There is some fairly significant impediments that will try and stop you. But if you're starting from scratch, extreme customer centricity, start from the customer, drive everything from the customer is the reference.
So, yeah, and in terms of actual examples, if you were having to do them and writing that digital customer centricity, what are some key focus areas that you would focus on?
So,
real pain points, yeah.
So the first pain point is actually recognizing you as an individual traveler. Most airlines today still recognize, they don't recognize travelers. They have what they call, they're order-centric. They're order-centric. And I don't think IATA's helped here with this, a term called one order. But they're order-centric. And what I mean by order-centric is you can have multiple customers on one order. And a lot of airlines, depending on what sales channel that came through, don't even realize who the customer is.
Yeah.
Won't even recognize who they are. They've got a 6-digit PNR and a surname. So Smith and a 6 digits. Well, there could be hundreds of Smiths in the system. So they're not recognizing you as an individual. You go onto Amazon, you go in there, you can see your order, you can see the state of your order, right? In fact, I have yet to find an individual that has ever referred to an Amazon order number. They've just log in as them, and they can go, that item is either delivered, it's in transit, or it's paid, or I'm looking at it, it's in my shopping basket, or whatever. Airlines have completely missed that sort of point, which is they're starting with something that has been ordered, not starting with the customer.
So one of the key things there that we see now is to book an airline ticket, you don't have to log in. But everywhere I transact on e-commerce, most of the time, I have to log in to my Amazon account. I have to log in. It's very rarely do you log in as a guest and pay. Usually they encourage you, or they force a login. Why don't...
Yeah, and I sort of challenge that, sort of saying that, you want to have the experience of being able to shop anonymously.
Yep.
I think that's something that's good. However, could you get better deals? Probably, if the airline understood you. Definitely.
Yeah.
And one of the things is people say, well, I don't have to log in. Well, you do have to log in to pay.
Yeah.
And, the best example I got was an app, a modern retailing food delivery app. I won't mention the name, but modern food delivery, never used the app before. Straight into shopping, and they didn't know who I was. I was anonymous. So I was shopping anonymously, selected an item that I wanted, and it said, you want to do it with Apple Pay? I went, yes. Do you want to create an account? Yes. Done. Literally 3 clicks, find the product, 1 click, 2nd click, pay with Apple Pay, fingerprint, 3rd click, well, in fact, it wasn't even a click, it was a tick the box, I'm setting up an account. If I did that on most airline sites, I'd probably have to scroll through 3 or 4 web screens of information and pages to log in and create an account and everything. We've got it all a little bit wrong. We're not thinking customer. We need to think customer as the start point and then worry about all the other pieces that come along after that. And I think that was a great example. I was able to actually find something, book it, and create an account probably in less than a minute.
Yeah.
And
that's a dream.
That's a dream. Most airlines would, and you don't have to be remembered if you don't want to be remembered. That's an individual's point. But, I do want to be recognised. I'm quite happy for an airline to understand who I am. I want them to treat my data, with respect. And I think this is where some of the new technologies I would be looking at would be saying, well, I don't even need your data anymore. Yeah. I just want a signal from you to say, what the data is. So you keep the data as an individual. As an individual traveller, you have the data. So I'd want to look at things like self-sovereign IDs. So, as an individual, you keep the data, and I just use the signal to be able to process what we're doing and selling for an airline. So there's a whole range of things that you can actually approach from that point.
Okay. And how do you think the others would react to such big players coming in? It won't be easy for them, I imagine. I can guess they've got deep pockets, but that doesn't help you all the time.
No, it doesn't. And there is a slow transition. I mean, the industry is transforming. It's slow in terms of what it's doing. But what you're seeing is it's probably 11 or 12 years ago. I was one of the founding members of creating NDC, the new distribution capability. And NDC was originally, it was a think tank team of airlines working with IATA, the industry body, to say, well, what if we wanted to set up an airline on Amazon? How would we do it? Could we even do it? And the answer was no, not with the current standards and the way that the industry works. So NDC's original goal was, how could you create an airline, on an Amazon marketplace? And what standards did you need to enable that to happen? And that was the original specs of NDC. NDC then got chopped down because it was such a big beast to cut off, and it created NDC in one order, and one order's come out. So there's 2 resolutions, 787 and 797, which are the 2 resolutions now for NDC, which is the new distribution capability, and one order. So the industry's created those, but they haven't thought about the holistic journey experience. They haven't thought about the customer at the front. They haven't thought about the delivery at the end, or the fulfillment and settlement at the end. Yeah. So a lot of people have gravitated towards NDC. Oh, it's great. It gives you a distribution company. Yes, it gives you some advantages. It allows you to distribute your product on any channel in any way you want, and it gives some advantages, and you'll see some big changes. American, IAG, Lufthansa, Qantas, a whole range of airlines are quite heavy into NDC and distributing it. But it sort of breaks at the next step, which is, well, okay, I can now distribute a product, but how can I be recognized as an individual that I've got that product? How do I service that product? You'll hear a lot of agents and stuff like that going, servicing's a nightmare on NDC. Well, it is, because airlines haven't really thought about the steps, which is really customer as a reference, an offer, an order, fulfillment, and settlement. And you need to bring all of those together in one package to deliver a truly digital airline. The other thing that would change if you did that would be disruption. I've been in this industry many, many years, as you kindly dragged out of me, Raza, in terms of my age. And what I would say is that what I've seen over the years is that everyone talks about IROPS, disruption. Well, and I've got something that will solve disruption. We will never solve disruption while we still carry the current PNR approach and the current legacy PSS approach.
Yeah, I agree.
It just will not happen. Doesn't matter how much good your AI is or anything along those lines, it will not solve the problem. You have to break it down and start from a customer perspective and attach, items that are. So I break it down as people talk about a flight. I want to go to New York, right, and return. Now that's the bucket of the product. That's the bundle. That's something that maybe the headline that you want to sell, fly to New York.
Yeah.
But what makes up that is quite a significant lot of items that make up that journey, and that can go depending on what level you want to go down to as an airline. Down to a can of Coke that you might sell on an aircraft, piece of Wi-Fi, a seat, flexibility or not flexible. It would go right down to the fact of, each segment, you might want to go via different routes to get to those destinations. So they become what I would class as SKUs or essentially an item that you're selling, be it a product or a service. Most airlines just have that as one bundle of stuff that they sell. So you can't solve a problem very easily. So technically, if you take something like a major carrier flying to New York, they have different configurations of the aircraft. One might have more business class seats than the other. Of course, airlines now want to sell seats. So they've sold the seats. They changed the aircraft from a high business class capacity to a sort of mid-business class capacity. Guess what? A bunch of customers don't get the products that they were sold. That were sold. Not even what they wanted, they were sold them, right? And what happens is the airline goes, well, I got you to New York. What's your problem? Right? And of course, that really destroys NPS. And airlines just haven't solved that. What the new digital channels and technology allow you to do is to break each of those components down. So a seat is a product. The flexibility is a product. You might have flexibility one way and restrictions the other way. You could have, and they become different items and they will have different attributes. So as soon as an aircraft change happens, bang, message to the customer saying, look, really sorry, some sort of nice marketing message, apologies, we're due to a technical issue, we've changed our aircraft, your seat is no longer available. Here are the 3 options you can do. Here's a refund for the seat. Here is, an upgrade or some loyalty points or something, whatever the decision of the commercial team is. Instant, as soon as the trigger of an aircraft swap happens from an operational system, that's customer centricity. And I'll give you a good example of that. In a previous airline, we put in a little test, and it was we joined a bunch of systems together, which was to join the baggage system to the commercial system, to the customer reservations, to the things. And it was about 4 or 5 systems all joined together. And what it essentially did, it was on a connecting journey through Heathrow, that it would send a message to the customer if the bag didn't make it. Yeah. And it was timed so that it would hit when the individual was landing, so it was taking the messages from the aircraft's landed. And when everyone's putting their phone on, you've been there, you landed, you can switch your phones on, bang, 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 you hear all these beeping. We would send a message there and we'd say, look, your bag hasn't made the flight. Here is your customer reference for the bag. Here's the reference to find, your bag. We've also reflighted that bag and it's going to be on the next available flight. Here is the reference of that. All right. Please don't wait at the carousel, and here is a voucher for you to go and do something, either get a piece. And then it would also ask whether you were going to be at the location that the bag was going to be reflighted to. And I can remember getting called into the CEO's office of this major carrier and him going, "What have you done? Because we've just got the first thank you message for losing someone's bag." And that was got a frequent flyer said, "I've travelled for many, many years on this carrier
And I've never
never had that type of service. I get that things go wrong, and you proactively gave me options. You didn't make me fill out forms. You knew who I was. You did all of this."
Yeah.
And that's what a genuine customer-centric airline could do. Now, we did that as a test. Unfortunately, we didn't implement it. And that was a mistake.
There's a point on this one, and it really bugs me. And I say this sometimes, and I get really bad looks sometimes, in especially in C-level conversations. Do airlines, I don't say deliberately, I say it lightly, but do we add friction in processes deliberately just to have interaction? Because if you zoom out, let's take check-in. Why do you have to physically check in anymore? You don't do it for a bus. You don't do it for a train. I buy my ticket, sit on board, and I go. I get there's safety involved. I get that. But there are elements that you can overcome. But why do we implement such a process?
No one's challenged it. And that was right back to the first question you asked, which is, what would you do different? And the answer is, you don't need any of that. It's just because we've been doing it for years. Yes, there is certain requirements to travel between one country and another country, right? That's taken. However, that information is all there, and everyone, you don't need to do that to process.
I mean, the pandemic would have eradicated some of that. You have to upload your documents beforehand.
Exactly. And not only that, it's the repeat exercises. Why do I have to reload and redo? Yeah. As I said, what we should be working on is on signals. I mean, you understand who you are. You have a bunch of attributes associated with you. Why can't we just tap into it? So today, most airlines work on the customer has to log into the airline. I would start with a customer-centric approach, which is the airline needs to log into the customer. So the customer's always responsible for their information and priorities, and that will later on get better and better. And it's much more secure because actually if you have got all your data in an airline system, then that becomes a honeypot. If a big airline with 100 million customers, that's very attractive to hackers. As important as we all are, I'm not that important for a hacker to spend as an individual to exert so much challenge, and today's security, it's going to be too costly for them to just hack me as an individual. They'll go for the easier targets. They'll go for the 100 million customers where there is a bigger prize at the end of the pie. So for me, it's more secure and it's more customer centric. You know who you are. You're changing all the time. You may have moved. You may have done something else. You may have, there's a whole range of different sort of aspects. Not only that, there is, it doesn't mean that you can't have a traditional CRM about that customer.
Yeah.
So I could have a reference in my CRM as, a string of numbers and digits, right? That can represent Glenn Morgan.
Yeah.
And all the attributes, Glenn Morgan likes this and Glenn likes that, can be all associated with that reference. You don't need to know it's Glenn Morgan.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody in the airline needs to know it's Glenn Morgan. Now, when you come to sell something to Glenn Morgan, you want to utilize those aspects and those points against that reference and be able to market and sell and offer good customer experience. That's great. But that's just a signal. So I come at what I would call as these flips. And if you look at all the big successful technology companies, they've made a flip. Ubers, the Teslas, they've made a flip of the business model. And that's why, right back to the beginning of the conversation, we talked about having the breadth and depth and then bringing that to strategy is changing the business model. You have to change the business model. No airline's changed the business model yet. And the reason is they're too scared and they're following the leader, right? And they keep looking at each other to see who do it. So the answer is there's a lot that have tried, but they want to keep all the old stuff as well. There's no one being radical enough to
just
make
on
the jump.
That, everyone's looking for the leader. I don't see a leader. I think all the proposed leaders are looking at each other to the side, but no one's taking that first step. Do you think there is?
I had a conversation with Bain very recently with some, and they were asking me, and they were talking about the industry, and they were talking about the fact that, eventually there's a view that eventually that consolidation will happen. More consolidation will happen. I think that's slightly changed with a bit more sort of countries leaning a bit more nationalistic.
Yeah.
But yes, let's say that there's more consolidation. If you can buy that premise, there will be some consolidation happens. And I challenge it though, and lots of the carriers would say, yeah, it's me. I'll be on that list of the consolidated airlines. And I challenge it to say that actually I think it'll be a completely new airline that we've never heard of before that'll be on that list. And, I think it will take someone to do the cliches. I have to say it'll be the cliches, the Airbnb, the Tesla, the Uber. It's going to be something like that. It'll be that'll come along.
That will commoditize everyone
and take a truly customer-centric approach and different, and may even own the whole value stream. This will be interesting to see, a carrier that may own the airport as well experience. Now, if you look at Amazon, they own the sort of supply chain experience, and it's helped them massively. So it's very difficult if you're flying to a lot of destinations, but certainly in your hubs, I'd expect that, if you want a really good customer experience, then you can start to look at doing some of that. And you look at some of the Middle East carriers where quasi-government own both, they work far better than, going to Europe where it's owned by something different. So you can see the advantages of that.
So, Glenn, what I want to talk to you now about is technology. Technology today and how it's evolving. I mean, it is rapidly changing day by day. Just even post the pandemic, where I've been focused a lot on technology, I've dove into the Web3 space, evolution e-commerce, and all of a sudden we've got AI and generative AI. AI and ML have been around for a while, but this new generative AI and the pace that it's growing and the possible companies it's creating is mind-blowing. Where do you see this going, and how can this be adopted in the travel space?
So I would start with defining sort of what I would say is there's a bunch of macro trends. They're typically driven by technology trends, and then macro trends come out of that, and then macro trends tend to drive industry trends. And I see this as a virtuous sort of flywheel effect. If you look at what Amazon's famous for talking about, its flywheel and how it generates sort of revenue and profitability and going forward and value. What I would say is the flywheel effect in technology. There's a few things that are happening. I've had a long career and I've seen some big changes in technology. The first major big change was before I even went into the work environment. It was the school environment, and that was the GUI interface.
Yeah.
The GUI, the graphical user interface, essentially. Everyone takes it for granted now, but it was green screens before that, and that was transformational. It was like, man, you can do you can put a picture with this instead of its text, and that was transformational. The second major transformation I saw was sort of in the sort of early 2000s was the e-commerce transformation, and probably add the social media sort of era. It expands a bit beyond the 2000s. But what that was a major transformation. I remember walking into an exec. I was a senior manager, but still, not on the executive. And I walked into the executive meeting room, and I was making a pitch around saying that we needed to invest a lot of money in e-commerce, creating a website and selling. And the carrier that I was working for at the time, British Airways, was the first to actually sell a ticket online, and way back. And we'd been looking at this, and it's seen a growing sort of, little signals bubbling up that this was going to grow.
Yeah.
And I walked into this room, we did a pitch and said, we need a lot of money, we need to build, a much better website, and we're going to need to be able to sell and do all of these things. And I can remember exactly what happened in that meeting. One of the directors, a very senior director, turned around to me and said, Glenn, no one is ever going to buy a business class ticket on the internet. It's good for buying books. It's not going to be for buying business class travel.
Cash in person is what
right?
I think.
And I was like, I couldn't quite understand, my sort of, I couldn't quite understand. I thought, well, this is a respected commercial director of one of the biggest airlines in the world saying this wouldn't happen. And I'm like, it's going to happen. I just had that, it was going to happen. Now, of course, that's not that long ago.
Yeah.
That is very not that long ago. This is in the sort of, 2000s. And no one even blinked an eyelid about buying a first class, business class, whatever ticket online. That's just taken for granted. So I see that wave. So that was the second wave. So it was first wave, the GUI. Second wave was the internet and e-commerce. The third wave is what people have classed as Web3. However, I've heard umpteen dozen versions of what Web3 is. So this is the transition to the next phase of the internet, I would say. What I would class Web3 is a set of technologies that are changing. So what I would say is, firstly, we have connectivity everywhere. You can get connectivity, high-speed connectivity, anywhere in the world now with low orbital satellite, with 5G. Has transformed technology, very, very high speeds, anywhere in the world.
Relatively low cost as well. So.
It's essentially a commodity, let's call it. Second is you have a supercomputer in your hand, right? Most people today are carrying a supercomputer in their hand. So the edge devices that people use on a daily basis are supercomputers. The third aspect of this is what I would class as a decentralization. So people have quite grown up around these platforms, but they're taking a little bit of, well, why is everything going to this central platform? Why does it all have to go to Facebook? Or why does it all have to go to Amazon? Or why does it all have to go to a central location? So there's been this big growth in what we would call decentralization. And you've seen it certainly in the finance sector. It's called DeFi.
Yep.
And it's based on, guess what? That good old thing called cryptocurrencies and stuff like this. I actually think that's a media statement. That's clickbait. There's far more to a decentralized ledger or, approach and what's happening. And that means that you can decentralize systems. So now you can decentralize. You've got global high-speed commodity connectivity, and you've got a supercomputer in your hand. Why does it need to all go back centrally? Then comes this little thing along, which is these large language models, LLMs. And it's just created the classic, which you can't get away from talking about ChatGTP or Bard or one of those at the moment. Now, the step change actually happened in about 2017, just before COVID and all of those sorts of things, was when the creation of the large language models come along. And it was essentially breaking it down in a very simplistic and non-technical way, was your ability to actually create machine learning language for every vertical. So, as you said, artificial intelligence, machine learning has been around for 20, 30 years, as long as before the internet. There was these the possibilities going right back to the war, where the first sort of crypto, breaking cryptology, in terms of what, and breaking the codes and everything like this. So that's been around for a very long time. What's different with the latest generation of LLMs is that it's all vertical. So you had a vertical of natural language, and you could do natural language and have some machine learning algorithms there. And then you had machine vision algorithms, and then you would have sort of commercial sort of algorithms, different mathematical algorithms for commercial aspects that would do this. LLMs have brought all of that together
into one.
And so it's exponential. And so what's happened is they've now got all the knowledge. They can anticipate and they can give a very good answer. And you can see from what's happening, it's exceeding most humans' capabilities straight away.
Yeah.
And it's going on. So now you've got connectivity, you've got edge computing, you've got a decentralization, you've got an AI. Then you bring in the new generation of what I would class as sort of virtual reality or augmented reality, so a new, different way of looking at the world.
Yeah.
You put those things together, you got a transformation, which is Web3. And that is where you would want to be building technology on going forward. So I bring, Web3, I think it's a bunch of trends coming together, a bunch of technology trends coming together that actually is going to drive the next wave of the internet. And companies, some very, very successful companies are doing it already in terms of trying to leverage all of this. It's certainly where the VCs are.
Yeah.
So if you look at what the VCs are investing in, it's edge computing, it's communications, it's the decentralization plays. It's the
you got to follow the money.
And that's a natural place. They tend to be the leaders, the leading thinkers of it. So I think that's where I see the trends, and I think that the opportunity to take a custom-centric approach to travel, leveraging Web3, hugely untapped opportunity.
Yeah, and I'll admit something, and I'll admit it to the audience, and I'll admit it to you, because I sat down with you in 2019 for a coffee. And I was writing a piece that I had been challenged with, where do we think the future of search will be? I don't even remember. This was my interview to join an organization, to which it was back-to-back, and I had met Glenn, who absolutely destroyed me in the interview and challenged every aspect. But then he had a statement and said, I'm going to tell you what search is going to be. Because I've stolen this and I've reused it now. It is, you will have a device, and the device will go to operators, airlines, hotels, and say, I have this person. They want this, this is their context, who wants their business, and they will build the offer for that person. Now, no one had that concept in their head, and it was hard to understand. I got it, I didn't know how it would play out, and when I would explain it to others, they were like, Glenn's mad. But now, if you think, and I write in ChatGPT, create me a trip to New York with my family of 4, bang. It will go search, and it will be, okay, you got 4 children, it's these age. If your device knows you and knows your habits, it will do all that search parameter for you. I think, like you said, 2 years ago, that's the future of search, and people are now going to have to make those products and atomic products, create them, but there will be the winner in this space will be that device or that thing that can do the search and bring those offers to you to create personalization. I don't know if it will be an airline or a travel company that does that.
I totally agree with you. And look, I still firmly believe that that's where the future will be, is what people are talking about is companies are jumping to work out what to do with this generative AI stuff, right? There's probably not a conversation at the exec level that hasn't had that word chat GTP, right? And they don't get it or don't understand it or don't want to get it or if threatened by it. What I don't think they've no conversation at the exec levels had yet is, hang on, what if this empowers the individual? Why do I need an AI that's working for a big company selling me something instead of, why can't I have an AI that sells what asks and goes out and finds and negotiates for me?
Yeah.
Right? What am I going to trust? Am I going to trust this big corporate over in the corner, or am I going to trust something that is working on my behalf and is mine?
Has my interest,
has my interest and has my knowledge and has my context, right? And is most up to date. That is going to win the game for sure. And I'll be first in. I've seen some early signals of this. I've seen some early signals where marketplaces are forming of customers' offers where the supplier has to go to, right?
Interesting,
and this is really, really interesting. Now, an AI is going to be far more effective at doing this. An AI, with the way that the technology, this Web3, those 5 trends that I talked through just before, means that you can have your own personal AI.
Yeah.
And that AI can go and work for you. The average on search, I think you probably know it better than me, Razza, but it was sort of 6 or 7 hours for a trip.
Yeah.
I don't have 6 or 7 hours. I'm time tortured. Right?
Time's money, right?
It just don't have that. Now, some people enjoy doing that research. That's where I see the VR and AR coming into play, which we haven't really talked about. You know, if you enjoy the destination experience of finding what you want to do, that's going to go into a whole virtual world, right? The drudgery of, who's going to get me there? Where should I stay? What's my life? No, that's going to turn into an AI. That's going to be my personal AI going out and saying, which airline's going to give me the best? I know what products I want. Here's what I want. Now someone make me an offer.
Yeah.
And it's a flip of the business model. It's going to be difficult to get there because what it will take is a number of consumers to get there first. And typically corporates will go where the consumer is.
Yeah.
So it's not something that's going to happen. It's going to slowly happen. But I think that once people realize the value of it, it's going to be like a snowball. It'll really flip and go very, very fast. And as I said, you've got a supercomputer in your hand, right? It can do a lot for you. And not only that, most people will be afraid to hand over their phone to somebody else because it's got so much of their context in there.
Exactly that, yeah.
Right? And so if it's got it all there, you don't have to give it to somebody, right? It can go out and act as a signal and negotiate on your behalf. And I think that's definitely going to be the way that goes. And it will be true customer centricity.
Amazing. I think that's literally a multi-billion pound idea right there. So if you want it, we bought it to you. Just remember that. So yeah, that brings me really nicely onto the next part. Is in your one of your previous roles, you were one of the founding fathers, I would say, of something that didn't really exist before, but now is becoming much more common, and is a sort of incubator, accelerator, and venture capital arm for an airline. What I'm interested to know, because a lot of them are coming up, but what was the sell to the C-level? Because that is the hardest part. You're asking an airline to put a budget aside, in essence, that may not ever give a return. How do you make that sell, and how did you go about it?
Yeah, okay. So firstly, I think the CEO of the airline group that I was working for, Willie Walsh, in International Airlines Group, he got it. He understood enough to know that it was important, but didn't understand what the problem was or how to define it. And so, hats off to Willie, because, you need an executive sponsor for a starting point, right? Yep. And it was there. And I worked with the strategy director at the time on this. And what we decided was the easiest way was it was very difficult to explain. You can't explain this in a PowerPoint. You can't talk about it on an Excel spreadsheet on numbers. You can't sort of, be oratory and explain it in a way that's oratory. So what we did is we took some senior executives to the heart of where innovation was happening at the time, into Silicon Valley, Israel, and a number of other locations globally where real, in the back of the garage, breaking, making stuff and breaking stuff and doing those sorts of things. So we took some senior execs, and they come back and they were just, and in fact, I know one senior exec who's there. He said it transformed his entire thinking about everything. And he was a seasoned commercial executive. And we took them there. And at the time, there was nobody offering corporate tours of Silicon Valley. That wasn't even heard of. This was a missed opportunity on my behalf, I have to admit. But so we formed up with a company that was called Rocket Space, and we had a conversation with the CEO, Duncan, at the time, and we're saying, like, he said, come and see them. Startups want to see these corporates, and the corporates need to see the startups. So we formulated this idea of sort of this corporates coming to see the startups.
A show and tell type.
But,
yeah.
And we took a number of executives over to this, and this just grew arms and legs. So this was the formation of it. And then, we're sitting there and we took them around, and, you when you see a CEO of an airline walk into a startup, one that's quite significant nowadays, and that startup, the individual standing at a standing desk wasn't heard of at the time, wearing shorts and a t-shirt, not business attire, such as airlines were traditionally looking at, with headphones on, in the zone, programming, right? It started to click. It started to click with the leadership. So that was the sort of the spark of the idea. And then what we said is that we needed to start to, we couldn't take the whole airline across to these regions. We needed to start bring some of the startups
to us,
to the airlines. So we looked and we asked the executive at the time, so it was a number of CEOs, and we asked them and we said, well, what are your problems? What are the problems that you really wanted solved? And we come up with 6 categories of problems. And then we went and scouted, and we worked with these Silicon Valley and Israel and a bunch of other sort of not incubators, but at the time sort of VCs and others. And we said, have you got a bunch of startups that could solve these problems? And they went, yeah. Would you like to put them in front of an airline, or several airlines, in fact? Yeah. and so we created the first accelerator, the first global accelerator, first airline global accelerator. Yes, before JetBlue, is Hangar 51, and we created an accelerator. And that accelerator, we bought a bunch of startups to solve and pitch to all these business people to pitch these ideas. And of course, those ideas then generated conversations with these senior executives, and therein goes the challenge. We had a 10-week exercise. We ran that for the last 8 years before I left. Every year we ran an accelerator, and we saw thousands of startups. And the alumni that went through the company, I think the stat when I left last year, when I left IAG, the stat was 62% of the startups that were on the accelerator had a commercial deal with one of the carriers in the airline in the group. And that's a phenomenal stat, right? That's a phenomenal stat. And that naturally lent on to that some of these startups were an accelerator.
Yeah.
We had an incubator, which was actually longer than the 10-week exercise. And that's essentially because most corporates are like elephants. They'll roll over and squash a startup in a nanosecond. The processes, the procurement, the legal, the IT, just roll over and kill the startup. So we created what we called the incubator, which was basically putting our arms around the startup to protect them from the corporate processes. They didn't have to do an RFP. They had 3 months worth of runway of cash. They couldn't spend 3 months doing an RFP. They'd be bust.
Yeah.
So we put our arms around these startups. And then, of course, that led naturally onto a venture. Why aren't we investing in these startups? So we ran for a few years with just the accelerator and incubator. Then we were pitching to do venture capital and saying we should invest in some of these because there's some good ideas and we're bringing value to these startups. Yeah. Why aren't we, participating? Well, lots of sucking of breath, lots of intakes of breath. And again, thanks to Willie and a couple of the other big directors, said, well, okay, do a shadow portfolio and then come back to us, and prove to us that this would work. Yeah. And it's like, well, it's a bit hard because, just a shadow portfolio, 6 to 12 months is not that long to prove something. But we had a couple of, I went to the board, the board at the time and showed a few startups. These were real genuine startups at the time, by the way. And so that they were startups that we thought that could sort of potentially change. One of them was more of a scale out, not a startup. So, and that little one was called Concur. It was before it was bought by a big company. Another little one, which was very much a startup at the time, was a little one called Airbnb. We met the founders of Airbnb before they'd even raised their Series A. And
so very early days.
Very early days.
You've discovered a unicorn here.
And we had these on our shadow portfolio, and people, certain board members might have been of certain, big hotel groups within there, and they were going, no one will ever do this. And it was exactly the same feeling I had when I had a director say, I'm never going to buy an airline ticket. And I was like, yeah, they're going to do this. And, so we ran a shallow portfolio, and I can remember several CFOs back in International Airlines Group coming up, and we'd been to the board, we'd talked about a couple of these companies, and then it was probably 6 months, maybe even 7 months later, and I get this email, which was to the exec of IAG, so it was, very senior. It was copied to all the board members of the group. And it was, Glenn, this is the CFO, Glenn, was that company, what was it, Concur, is that the company that's just sold? And I had the great pleasure in thinking long and hard about this email and how do I respond to this email, and someone just said, just say yes. So I just responded yes, and that company had sold for $6 billion. And I think that was a wake-up message. That's where the CFO come on board and said, we got to do this. And he turned around and said, here's the money. And so now I had the executive and the strategy and the CFO going, we should do this. And we set up the capital arm off the back of that. And then others set up after us and copied. JetBlue Ventures, very, very successful. They're in the heart of Silicon Valley. Great team, great team. Yeah. Set up with Bonnie, she did it really, really great. And we, in fact, did a lot of co-investment with JetBlue Ventures, and now you see a number of United Ventures, American have got a venture arm, KLM are doing something, Lufthansa have got some stuff in the background.
It's a really unique space, and I think, yeah. I've seen it as an audience member and been a part of these processes, and what you brought to the airline space in bringing those startups there. It's amazing. Some of the technology blew my mind. I remember being outvoted on a number of ones parting up, and you see them become unicorns literally a year or two later. And it's just like, opportunity gone. But it's such a fascinating learning and a process to be a part of. So it was, amazing.
Yeah, but most companies have what they call the innovator's dilemma. Christian Clayton wrote a book many years ago about innovator's dilemma, which is most corporates will weed out what they would call the entrepreneurs within. They'll never get up to exec leadership. Yeah. They're too radical. They're weeded out of corporates, and so most corporates have an innovator's dilemma. And you've seen it with some of the big. Previously golden child startups, Google, has it missed the AI boat, right? People must be questioning that at the moment. It's like, wow, ChatGPT, where did it come? Microsoft obviously went, oh, we've missed it. We're going to do something about it big, and have generated this race on this AI race. I think that most corporates can't see the wood through the trees. It's very, very difficult, and you need something like that. The difference that IAG did and what Hangar 51 did was we built it into the company DNA. So, the Hangar 51 was in the head office alongside of the exec. I think that's truly different from some of them where it's bolted onto the side. So, we've got one of those, it's over here. Yeah. You need it. I remember one startup that very successfully implemented into IAG, and they sat outside the commercial director's office at a round table for 10 weeks of the accelerator. It was just a little round table, sort of chairs, and they saw, and of course, naturally, they saw the director every single day because he had to walk past them every single day. And, you know, that's the difference. It was built in versus bolted on to the side. You know, the startup can't do it on its own and the corporate can't do it on its own. You have to work together.
Amazing. So just moving on from that piece, Kenneth. So you must have obviously been exposed and still exposed to that sort of startup community and these great founders. Are there any ones today that you've seen and think, wow, this has legs, or this is really good, that you may want to highlight?
Yeah, this is where I always get nervous, right? Because this is, you know,
This is you putting your neck on the line.
Yeah, hindsight's a wonderful thing, right? And you know, I've been lucky to have some good hindsight on some topics. So yes is the answer. Some of them are in stealth still. Some of them are public. I would say one very interesting one in travel at the moment is Chain for Travel. It is what we'd call a level 1 blockchain. And why it's different is it's designed for the travel ecosystem, not just airlines. It's everyone in the travel ecosystem. So it's bringing it together, and it's designed and run in conjunction with the travel industry. And I think it's utilizing some of those key trends that I was talking about before, decentralization. It's using the capabilities. And so think of Ethereum, or Hyperledger as some of the big brand name blockchains that people would know about. They are big corporates behind them, right? They're big corporates. They're not the travel industry.
Yeah.
And typically, if you get a big corporate behind that, then there's going to be value extracted. What I like about Chain for Travel is you're part of the bank. You're not. You're
you
part
have an
of
equal
it.
say.
You have an equal say. You have a vote on it. You can control the direction it goes. And so, and there's a lot of companies of, 200 plus have seen. They've just gone live with their level 1 blockchain. I think it's definitely one to watch. And, I'm very, very upbeat on that. Another one that is very interesting is a company called Trend, which is ratings with AI can't be believed or trusted. Right. Even some of the big, TripAdvisors and stuff like this, you'll see publicly as saying, fake reviews are a real issue. Trend is a startup that is basically guarantees that the review is legitimate with authenticity, but it works on the fact that it also rewards the reviewer. So it encourages, because at the moment, the reviews have been a bit one-sided. It's been like, do a review. Well, it's my time.
Yeah.
Right? So trend works in the opposite direction. It's customer-centric. Not only that, it gives really great insights that to the corporate. So I can see that transforming. I absolutely believe, people look at reviews. They're really quite important in conversion. And if they can't be trusted, then that's going to undermine that. I think that if you can have a trusted review mechanism, that's a great example. I pivot away into, I've seen some very interesting pricing capabilities. One startup that is doing that flip. So it's saying, why would I use all this expensive compute at an Amazon or a Google or a Azure? Can I send the pricing algorithm to the device and be aware and context of what's happening around the network? So very, very good revenue management sort of approach. And that pricing could be applied to anything in travel. So dynamic priced offers are going to be here, big time. You see airlines are concentrating on that already, but not only that, all parts of the value stream will want to concentrate on that. So I think that that's another nice big area. I would say that sustainability is quite high at the moment. So I'm passionate about changing the net zero. I think travel, I mentioned freedom at the beginning. We've got a big challenge. We need to solve the CO2 aspects. So there's contrails are a big warming effect of, they create warming effects of the earth. So contrail management, so a company called Cetavia is looking at being able to remove them. They're very visible. You see a contrail, we know it can warm the earth. It stops heat from being, escaping, and therefore is contributing to what we would call non-CO2 emissions. The actual IPCC report that come out on that was up to 60% of airlines emissions are from contrails.
Wow.
And it's 5% of flights. And something you can do right now to change it, which is to adjust the flight.
Low-hanging fruit, yeah.
So it's a low-hanging fruit. Don't create contrails. And Cetavia has created a scientific model that allows you to not do contrails. So, I mean, that's impactful today. And SAF companies, direct carbon capture, 1.5 is a direct carbon capture company over in the US looking at building multiple direct carbon catchers. I think that's very interesting. So, there's a whole range of startups that I think, I could list a dozen.
Yeah.
I won't, and it won't benefit for everyone on the call, but, more than happy for anyone to reach out, and if they've got a challenge or a problem. I've probably seen a startup that's trying to solve that problem or challenge at the moment, and corporates typically don't trip over them that easily, and the startups don't know how to get to the corporates. So
100%, and this is why this podcast is created, to bring expert like you and connect those people to these experts and that information. So Glenn's details will be in the descriptions and the comments below, so more than happy for you guys to reach out and have that discussion. So just closing off the podcast now, Glenn, what's next for you in your journey and your adventures, and what are you up to now, and how can people get in touch with you and follow you, for example?
It's quite simple. I've left the big corporate scene. I've set up my own business. I'm also working in partnership with another business based out of Switzerland called 3-Dot. So we have common interests, we have common objectives and common goals. So we've been working together. I've set up a ventures business, which I've been doing some investments. So I've been doing my own angel and investment, and setting up that with a fund, working on those sorts of things. So that's working with the startups. However, sometimes the startups can't pay you, and I realised that you actually also need to generate some income. So I've been doing some strategy work alongside of that, and as I said, I've partnered with 3-Dot, who also does strategy work and looking at retailing. So taking all of this, understanding what NDC one order is, and actually creating a strategy to transform and a route through.
Yeah.
The fortunate thing, I've had lots of scars and experiences of trying to approach how to do this, and so understand some of the key pitfalls in doing that. And then also looking at a whole range of strategic strategies, both for the startup and for the corporate, acting as a human API to join those two things together. Know who to talk to in the startup, know who to talk to in the corporate, bringing them together, so that conduit there. So I've got a big youth tour coming. So working with a company called Nextworks, and we're bringing passionate about the youth, passionate about the environment, bringing them a bunch of youth with some of their executive parents to a tour around London to see what's going on in generative AI, in fintech, in a whole bunch of different technologies that we're going to take them around, and just get them to understand how things are going to be different with all these technologies we discussed today.
And building the leaders for the future. Yeah?
And building the leaders for the future, hopefully.
Amazing. Glenn, this is something I do at the end with my guests, and it's a quick fire round. There will be a couple of one-worders for you and to get your opinion on. It's just fast, rapid-fire answers. And then we'll lead on to slightly longer questions, and they will have a rapid response as well. So Let me know when you're ready, and we'll fire away. Yeah.
Go.
3, 2, 1. Technology.
Fantastic.
Blockchain.
Opportunity.
Motorcycles.
Awesome.
Willie Walsh.
Excellent.
Tim Clark.
Excellent.
London.
Home.
New Zealand.
Home.
Dubai.
Home.
Chicken or beef?
Beef.
Aisle or window?
Aisle.
City break or beach break?
Beach.
Last minute boarder or early lounger?
Definitely last minute.
747, A380.
787.
IFE all the way, book reader all the way.
Both.
One essential travel item you cannot do without.
Noise cancelling headphones.
Anyone's in particular?
I do take two, actually. I have Apple's minis and the Bose over the ear.
Amazing.
So I usually have both. Typically short haul is the Apple ones, and then long haul tends to be the Bose.
We're chancing it. We're trying to get a brand deal. One bit of travel advice you would give to anyone.
Research.
One thing you would change about the travel industry.
Executives.
Best holiday destination.
That's a tricky one. I go with Koh Samui.
Common myth about travel.
Technology is its problem.
Brilliant. That's it for today. Thank you so much again, Glenn. So, like I said, we'll put the details of getting in touch with Glenn. Glenn, where can people find you and follow you?
I'm very easy. It's Glenn at airfusion.xyz is my email address. But reach out to that. I'm on all the social media platforms, LinkedIn and Twitter and stuff. So you more than easy to find me with a simple Glenn Morgan search. But yeah, just reach out to me, and I'm happy to sort of look at any challenge or any problem that you're facing at the moment. So it's exciting times.
Yeah, definitely. I could go on for hours with you, Glenn, discussing about so many different things, but I guess we got to bring this to an end. So thank you so much for today, Glenn, and I wish you all the best. And thank you for joining the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.